Good evening and welcome to the Grosse Pointe Historical Society's first Dr. Frank Bicknell lecture of the 2021-2022 season. This lecture is named in honor of Dr. Frank Bicknell, who lived in Grosse Pointe on Brevard, by the way, for many decades. His daughter and son-in-law created the Dr. Frank Bicknell Trust Fund to mark Dr. Bicknell's 80th birthday in 1987. Dr. Bicknell attended these programs until his passing in 1999. I'm Mike Skinner, chairperson of the Society's Bicknell Committee. The other members of the committee are Adam Hellebuck, Adam, in the back, and Sue Lewandowski, who unfortunately could not join us tonight. Adam is the evening's moderator, handling the technical issues relating to this program.
If it was on Zoom, I would be.
Yes, well, you're still a technical guy, I should mention that as many of you know, I've been on this committee since 1992. I've been chair a number of times, and we've been taping most of these programs. And Adam, again, the technical guy. How many, Adam? 70 plus?
78 on YouTube.
78 different programs have now been put onto YouTube, so you can go back and watch many of the programs that we've done in the past. We're happy to return to in-person program format. The plan was also to live stream this program this evening for those not able or not comfortable to attend in person, but due to a technical issue, well, I might as well mention it. We should have asked if they had Wi-Fi in the building here, but we'll go back to it next month. But Adam will be adding it to the Society's YouTube channel, a recording of tonight's program later this week for anyone to watch in the future. The Historical Society is looking forward to the completion of its new administration and collection resource building across Kirchhoff from its 1823 Provençal Warehouse Museum next year. I'm happy that we've been the capital campaign has been successful. We've broken ground, and I'm sure many of you have seen the pile of dirt on this site since the groundbreaking of this facility took place recently. We hope that you'll consider donating to the Society's capital campaign, which is being used to finance the completion of this building. The Society also looks forward to reopening its circa 1823 Provençal Warehouse Museum and resuming in-person programs such as the second Saturday open house tours and the one-room schoolhouse sessions as soon as it's safe to do so. Now let me describe the rest of the 2021-22 season before I introduce this evening's speaker. Next month, and they're always on the third Wednesday of the month, unless the third Wednesday of the month is the night before Thanksgiving, then we move back to the second Wednesday. But Wednesday, October 20th, here at the Cook One Room Schoolhouse, there's a new book coming out called Becoming the Motor City, A Timeline of Detroit's Auto Industry. This book tells the story of how the auto industry in Detroit grew, prospered, and ultimately suffered together, and how southeastern Michigan continues to lead the world in the future charting of mobility, many times led by Grosse Pointers. Paul Vachon, who is also a 2018 Bicknell lecturer, is the author and freelance writer for whom Detroit area history is his favorite subject. He earned a BA degree from Sacred Heart Seminary College in Detroit and worked in retail for 2 decades before becoming a full-time writer. November 17th, the third Wednesday in November, will be the book When the Lions Were King, the Detroit Lions in the Fabulous 50s, the Wayne State University Press book. This book recounts the period when the Detroit Lions were at the top of their game, winning league championships in 1952, 1953, and 1957. During this period when Detroit's population, and some say influence, also peaked. The author is Richard Bach, who was a 2010 Bicknell lecturer. He's a graduate of Eastern Michigan University, is a member of the Society of Baseball Research and Professional Football Researchers Association. Then we always have these lectures in, as many of you know, September, October, November. Then we take the winter off and come back in March, April, and May. And in March, here at the Cook One Room Schoolhouse, on March 16th, will be Secret Societies Detroit from the History Press. The books are going around, if you haven't seen these books. This book tells the story of the secret societies that have operated in Detroit for most of the city's history. Many started for fun and companionship, others had serious ends in mind, and Grosse Pointers were members of most of these groups. The author, Bill Loomis, a 2013 Bicknell lecturer, a freelance writer, possesses a degree in comparative literature from the University of Michigan and has done graduate work in television production at New York University. He has published articles in the New York Times, Quality Magazine, and a variety of business academic journals, including Michigan History Magazine, Detroit Hour Magazine, Crane's Detroit Business, and the Detroit News. He's also regularly appears on Detroit talk shows and history-related programs like Mysteries at the Museum. Then in April, here at the school, will be Better Made in Michigan from the History Press American Palette Series. This book tells the story of how Better Made came to be, how its chips are made, and how competition has shaped the industry. More than 40 local potato chip companies once fed the Motor City's never-ending appetite for salty snacks, including, some of you will remember these names, New Era, Evercrisp, Crunchy, Mellow Crisp, Wolverine, and Vitaboy. Today only Better Made remains. Better Made founder or co-founder Pete Cipriano lived in Grosse Pointe Park. Author Karen Dybus, a Grosse Pointe resident since 2002 and graduate of the University of Michigan, has blogged as assignment Detroit writer for Time Magazine, worked for the Oakland Press and Detroit News, and jumped on stories for publications including Court Magazine, Detroit Unspun, and Agency France Press Wire Service. Finally, in May every year during Preservation Month, we co-sponsor a program with the Grosse Pointe community's greatest preservation example, the Ethel and Eleanor Ford House. And the lecture will be at the new Ethel and Eleanor Ford House Visitor Center May 18th. It will be based on a new book or an upcoming book called Mega Builder Henry Ford and His Circle of Architects, and we'll focus on the section of the book that deals with Ethel and Eleanor Ford and their circle of architects and designers. This book will be published in 2023 by Wayne State University Press. This book tells the story of the impact of Mr. Ford and his son Ethel Ford and what they had on architecture, engineering, and building technology, and the many architects, landscape architects, industrial and interior designers that worked with the Fords. Author Brian McMahon, a trained architect with degrees from the University of Notre Dame and Platt Institute of Business, School of Architecture, has lectured and written extensively on industry, urban history, and architecture. His first book, The Ford Century in Minnesota, tells the story of the Ford Motor Company production in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, from the Model T era through the closure of the Twin Cities assembly plant in 2011. Many of you may know that was right on the Mississippi River and the powerhouse that Henry Ford and the company built now belongs to a hydroelectric power company. Tonight's program is technically not tied to Grosse Pointe's community history, as is normally the case with Grosse Pointe Historical Society Bicknell lectures. But once I introduce the presenter and the tie to the widow of the main character in this Civil War story, it will be obvious why it's appropriate for this lecture series. The topic of this lecture tonight is the book, An Aide to Custer, the Civil War letters of Lieutenant Edward G. Granger, which was published by the University of Oklahoma Press in 2018. This book features 46 letters that Lieutenant Edward G. Granger, a member of the 5th Michigan Cavalry Brigade, wrote to family members during the Civil War, along with maps and photographs related to his letters and the battles he was involved in. On August 20th, 1863, Lieutenant Granger was appointed an aide to Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer. He would hold this position until his death at the Battle of Crooked Run in August 1864. Our presenter is Thomas E. Singelyn, DDS, retired dentist, Civil War artifact collector, and past and honorary Grosse Pointe Historical Society board member. He transcribed 43 letters that Lieutenant Granger wrote during his 2 years of military service. Tom received Lieutenant Granger's letters from past President Honorary Historical Society board member Lisa Gandelot, who is the widow of Lieutenant Granger, was her paternal great-grandmother. Tom was born and raised on Detroit's east side. He had an early interest in antique military items and their history. As World War II was raging, his parents felt it was wise to send him at age 14 to a military school. He would graduate as an officer and be prepared if he was called into the U.S. military service. He attended the Tennessee Military School in Sweetwater, Tennessee for 4 years and thrived in the military training. In his senior year, he was promoted to cadet major, the ranking officer over the student body. He never served in the U.S. military, though, as the war was over before the end of his college education. After high school, he attended Olivet College as a history major. In his senior year there, he changed his major to dentistry, transferred to the University of Detroit pre-dental program, and was appointed into their dental school. After graduation, he began private practice on Warren Avenue and later moved his practice to Mack Avenue near the intersection of Warren Avenue and the Grosse Pointe Post Office area there. He was also invited to become a part-time instructor at the University of Detroit Dental School, became chairman of the Restorative Dentistry Department. He taught there for 16 years, practiced dental dentistry for 38 years. During those years, he developed a keen interest in military artifacts and their history, and owns a private collection of items from colonial times to the present. He has written articles for collector magazines and is quoted in several arms books based on his thorough knowledge. His special interest is Civil War related items. In retirement, he's remained active in collecting and researching military equipment. He has recently had 2 books published. The first is tonight's topic, and it includes information related to General Custer in the Civil War that has not been previously known. The second book is titled Model 1841 Rifles and Their Confederate Bayonets. This book is of interest to the most advanced collectors, and no one can leave without buying the 2 books. He's got a pile of each up here. No, I'm just kidding. Also in retirement, Tom became a broker of firearms and military items, mainly from estates, and you may talk with him afterwards, of course, if you have any questions, and his books are available for purchase. More importantly, Denise, raise your hand. Tom's been married to Denise for 65 years. They have 3 grown children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 3/4 great-grandchildren. So one of your great-granddaughters is 7 months pregnant? Yes, okay, I understood, all right. Tom and Denise met in 1950 at a Detroit nurses camp for underprivileged children in Waterford, where they were both counselors. They never dated anyone else after they fell in love. They both had a lot of education to get through before any serious talk about marriage, but married in 1956 during Tom's senior year at dental school. They went deep into debt to set up Tom's dental practice, but it all worked out. And again, Lieutenant Granger's wife, Molly Berner, as in ginger ale, Granger, was Lisa Gandelot's paternal great-grandmother. And Lisa sends her regrets since she had to go to Charlevoix to her home up there because her sister was coming into town to meet her. So she sends regrets and wishes us a good evening. So I'll turn it over to Tom. Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. A real pleasure to be asked, and I'm glad this huge crowd showed up. So, indeed, Lisa Gandelot was key to this. She inherited this group of letters, some of which had the original envelopes, stamps on them, and she said, I want you to look at them and see if they're worth it. So I browsed through and I was real excited. Called her right away and I said, Lisa, these are tremendous. And collectors pay premium prices when the battles are discussed or equipment that will carry. That's what they want. That's the meat for the whole dinner. So I found some of those statements, and when I got all through browsing the letters, I called her up and I said, would you mind if I work on this and maybe get it published? It's that good. And her husband, being a lawyer, was also brought into it. And we said, well, okay, we'll get an agreement that protects you from the family suing you, like say, and so forth. So he took care of that. Well, I started to decipher each letter. The letters were in reasonably good condition. His handwriting is excellent. When he really tried, he became a calligrapher in the style he would put on paper. In the heat of battle, he didn't sit down and write a letter because he was active as a cavalry lieutenant. A lieutenant in the cavalry commands the legion, not the platoon. In the infantry, the lieutenant commands the platoon. In the infantry, there are 4. Let's see, I want to get this straight. There are 4 platoons to a company. In the cavalry, I believe there are 4 legions to the company. There are 4 companies to a regiment. The average Union regiment is about 1,000 people, all men, of course. In the pecking order of the military design, platoon is the lowest combat unit. It's composed of squads. Squads, 10 to 12 men, and they're, let's see, there is corporal for each one and so forth, and the companies and the regiments and all the rest of the things are the troops, like from regiment goes division, from division goes corps, and then it goes right up to the President of the United States. So bear with me, and as I call out some of these people, you can kind of place where they would be in the pecking order. All right, the letters, once deciphered, I had Denise copy them. I can't type at all. I'm the only one in the state of Michigan who can't. So we got a manuscript. And for each one of the letters, I did a paragraph or 2 about what the letter contained. So any reader could pick that up and then get into the letters. After I get the manuscript done, I asked a writer, an author friend of mine, how best to get it published. And he said, well, I go, he was a really good author who I'll know. He said, I go right to the university press. It sounds like that's where you ought to take your time. So I went to them, and I went to the Oklahoma University Press. And they were very kind. They said, we like what you have. However, it's very obvious you are an amateur. So we would like to suggest if we get a ghostwriter that works with you. And I said, well, that's fine with me. I said, I just want to get Granger's letters in print. So a man named Sandy Bernard was recommended, and Sandy said, well, we need to flesh out what you've written here, Tom. So he did, and he's a professional book salesman now, a professor of history, retired, and he and his wife travel all over. His specialty happened to be General Custer, but not in the Civil War. His specialty was the Indian Wars, in which we all know was the end of Custer too. Hollywood has given Custer really a bad name. They've made a dupe out of him that was a blunder. They implied through Errol Flynn, who acted in the original Custer portrayal, a rowdy, drunkard, and they really let the public know he was last in his class. However, in reading the letters, you find he became the Patton of the Civil War. He had intellect. He could ride a horse like nobody. His men loved him. They loved Patton too. Old blood and guts. They were proud of that in the World War II. And they were very proud to be in the Wolverine Brigade. I'll tell you how he got there. It's interesting. Custer got out of school in 1861. That would be in the spring of '61. right? Dick, when is the graduation at West Point?
Where, Custer?
When is graduation?
Oh, it's in June.
June, all
Yeah,
right.
in June.
We got out in June, and he was assigned to cavalry. The cavalry, the outfit that he was assigned to was in the northwest section of the United States, up in Montana, in that area, patrolling Indian reservations and so forth. So the war starts, and Washington recalls all these people, and so they came back to reorganize and start to build a big army. And General Pleasanton, who was the corps commander of the cavalry corps of the Army of the Potomac, picked Custer, a man named Wesley Merritt, and another man named Farnsworth, Elon Farnsworth, 3 young men, and he put them on his staff. They were lieutenants and second lieutenants. What does a kid like that do on a big, powerful staff? He's an errand boy. He runs messages and he delivers things, and he does the bidding of the commanding officer, who is usually a major general in the Civil War. Custer showed his merit, his taste for action right away, and General Pleasanton recognized that. So did Merritt, and so did Elon Farnsworth. Just before the Battle of Gettysburg, June 29th, 1863, those 3 men were all jumped from, at that point they were captains on the staff, jumped from captain all the way to brigadier general. One great big jump. They call them boy generals. And that was, remember this date, June 29. That's when the appointment was made. 3 days later, Farnsworth was shot full of holes at Gettysburg, dead as a mackerel. He was ordered by a general named Judson Patrick, to lead a feudal charge. Merritt became very famous as a major general, and so did Custer. Now, because Merritt graduated in 1860, he outranked Custer by 1 year in actual pragmatic military. That didn't sit too well with Custer. We know that General Custer was flamboyant in his style. Now, let's forget all that and focus on this guy. 19 or 20 years old. At 19 or 20 age, he gets all excited about wanting to go into the Civil War. He's a student at Michigan Normal, Michigan State, and he decides, okay, I'm going to leave college and I'm going to go into the service. So he had some connections, his father did, and he said, there's a nice regiment of my friends from Grand Rapids forming, the governor's commissioned him, why don't you go see if you can get in? So he did, and he was with that regiment. It was the 5th Michigan Regiment. The kepi here is kind of what they would wear. Cross sabers means cavalry, and the 5 is for the regiment. So off he went, and let me stop a minute. The reason that the publisher was interested in the book is because of his affiliation with Custer. Otherwise, he'd just be a lackey on the general staff. It's a good choice. Now, his Granger's social life in Grosse Pointe brought him in touch with Libby Custer. Libby Custer was a very pretty girl, and Custer was full of beans. Libby Bacon was her maiden name, and her husband, her daddy was a court judge down in Monroe, and he didn't think much of Custer. So anyway, without Custer, this whole thing wouldn't be of interest. Now, the first major engagement the 5th Cavalry engaged in was the Gettysburg thing. The 5th was ordered, 5th Michigan Cavalry, was now part of what was to be known as the Wolverine Brigade. And there were 5 regiments of cavalry in that brigade, and Custer commanded the brigade. Custer knew Granger, knew him socially, because they're partying on Grosse Pointe. They mingled. And so it was an opportunity for him to see a lot of big shot generals too. He was in the company of Libby when General Custer was called to Washington for command meetings, things like that, and he would have Libby escort, or have Granger escort Libby to horse racing, picnics, and outings. There was many comments about Libby, and the Custer files, who love to read in-depth stories about Custer, will learn some things here that aren't in the books. One of which is a buggy accident, throwing Custer out. He slammed on his head and got a concussion, was unconscious for 3 or 4 days. They hushed that up because the commanding general of the brigade doesn't want to be known as a guy who's got flipped off his horse and was cuckoo. So that I find interesting. Another interesting thing about the 5th Michigan, they were issued the famous Spencer rifles. Spencer rifle was a magazine fed, that means keep bullets, cartridges with the gun, magazine, breech loading, carbine, and rifle. The rifle was available, so the whole regiment, 5th Regiment, was armed with the rifles. Later on, they exchanged those and got carbines because they're easier to carry and lighter. And you could fire 7 shots with a Spencer. By the time a muzzle loading guy loaded maybe twice. And you could hide behind a tree and do all this. While the other guy, muzzle loading, his arms are flying around and going through this, he was subject to wounds and incoming stuff. Now there's Custer standing posed. That is Molly later in her life, after he was killed in Virginia. Go ahead. Okay, Mike. General Mosby, he was a guerrilla that Custer clashed with and chased around. Mosby got all the way up to the Ohio border with his guerrilla band, gave the Union Army a fit. Advance, please. This is General Alger of the Alger Estate. He was at one time in command with the 6th Michigan Cavalry under Custer, and then he was later on command of the 5th.
So this is Russell Elger Sr., whose son Russell Elger Jr. built the moorings, which is now the Grosse Pointe War Memorial.
Right.
All right.
Advance, please. This is a picture of Granger without his big mustache and in a different style uniform. He was very concerned about uniforms. They wear out real fast. And boots too. They just go right through those. They wore wool uniforms and very hot. Next, please. Here's Pleasanton, Seated, and Custer. Note the difference in uniforms. General Pleasanton is a major general, and Custer is only a brigadier there. He's got all this fancy stuff on his sleeves, and he was, what about Patton? He ran around in pink pants. He set that up, and he'd wear an aviator's jacket and so forth. Advance, please. This shows where the Battle of Gettysburg took place and where many of Granger's battles in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. They went up and down and fought a lot of small engagements. Next, please. More charts. Forget that. Next.
Okay.
Next.
That's Trevelyan, right? You want to talk about that or no?
Yeah. Trevelyan Station was one of the larger battles, and it was a draw. During which battle, very interesting thing happened. The Confederates captured Custer's baggage wagon, and in it was Granger's captured Confederate saber, and not that. And his clothing, all his writing materials, and Custer's dress uniforms and things like that. And that later showed up in Texas many, many years ago. Finally retrieved, and now it's it was on loan, came to Monroe, and it was used to travel around. Next, please, Mike. This is General Longstreet.
Oh, okay.
Jeb Stuart.
No, it's Stewart.
Jeb
Stewart. Yep.
Stuart.
Yeah, yep.
Jeb Stuart was killed by a man in the Custer Brigade. He was shot in the liver and died painfully 3 days later. His name was John Huff. Next, please. This is Huff's tombstone up in Armada, Michigan. Made sure I got up there and got that picture. Huff was killed later at Hawes Station, another small battle in the Shenandoah. Next, please. Well, that's Libby. Isn't she beautiful?
So is this before she marries Custer or after?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think the photo is dated.
It doesn't say, yeah.
Yeah. Next, please. This was Granger's uncle. He was shot at Trevelyan Station twice and died. Major in the 6th Cavalry, and
So Harry Granger.
Henry,
I'm
Granger.
sorry.
Yeah. Next, please. This is Phil Sheridan, Custer's commander. He's got 2 stars, Major General, and the only Lieutenant General, which was the next jump, was Grant for the Union Army. The Confederate Army had several Lieutenant Generals. Hood was one of them. Of course, Lee was. Lee was commander, of course, the whole Army. Next, please. This is Libby later with her family. Next, please. No, I'm sorry, it's not Libby. That picture was Molly. Molly was his sister. Most of the letters went to Molly. A few went to his mother, and that was pretty much exclusive in the letters. Next, please. This is seated one is Molly, and this is Molly's mother. Both of them are named Mary, so to distinguish easily, one got nicknamed Molly.
And that's indicated in the book that that's her 50th anniversary
Yeah,
of her marrying Granger originally.
right.
And yet she fits into her wedding gown. I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm sorry, thank you.
Next, please. Custer's in the mix here, and let's see.
It says he's seated in a chair on the porch, right?
No, it's so blurry, it's hard to, probably.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, see, there's the chair. It's right here.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not certain about that one. Whether that's a mislabel or not. Just doesn't look like it. Next, please. General Custer was asked by the Detroit Free Press to write an obit about Granger when he got killed. The story that the newspaper will tell is Granger rode his horse up to Custer, and he said, "I want to go on a charge and kick the rebels out of the woods here. They'd been harassing the Union Army." And it's where Winchester, Virginia is a little tiny stream that flows through called Crooked Run. So Custer said, "Yes, but be careful." So he went up to Colonel Kidd, in charge of the Michigan 6th, and off they went, sabers flashing and screaming and yelling, and into the woods. And Custer said, all I could see was gunfire smoke, and then out came a horseless rider, and the rest of the men were chasing, and that was Granger's horse. He got shot, killed. They don't know where his body was buried. Now, in the heat of battle, you don't stop and bury your dead. Somebody's chasing and somebody's running. So they don't know where his corpse is. The article is very praiseworthy and gives you an idea of just how much he was thought of. So that's the end of my story. I wanted to get his story written up, and this is the way to do it. So, if there are any questions, I'm glad to answer them. Yes, sir.
I read someplace that when Custer was at West Point and when the Civil War broke out, all the Southern cadets left. So Custer actually would have graduated about in the middle of his class.
Well,
One way to do it.
one way, anyway, it doesn't make any difference. When the day you graduate, everybody's the same. I found that out in military school. Yeah, of course, you're given your choice, and a lot of them did choose to go south. Anybody, any other questions?
So were his letters generally complimentary of Custer?
Very.
And was there ever any criticism?
He adored Custer. Custer swore off alcohol the minute they took him, and the minute they released him from West Point. Now, he probably had some beer and stuff with the rest of the guys, but he knew that alcohol and good command thinking didn't work. And he was a gentleman. He didn't swear. He didn't fool around. Straight arrow. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
How difficult was it to translate the letters into modern language and understanding?
Well, I had no trouble. He was well educated, it's a good question, and his penmanship was generally very easily read. A few times Denise had to help me out with questionable words, but it was pretty clear sailing.
Was he a man of means? Was he wealthy?
No. His father died, and his mother took Edward and Molly to Detroit, and there was an uncle that said, "Come, you live with me," and he took care of them. And then the rest is military story.
May I interject your question? The letters I thought were very difficult to read because paper was very scarce. So they used every part of the page. So they would go down and write the letter, and then they'd go back and write between the lines, and then they'd write up the sides and on the back. It was difficult, so Tom would dictate and I would type as we were translating them so that we could easily read them.
The reason I asked in graduate school, I had the pleasure of doing a work study at the Permanent Historical Collections at the University of Michigan and read some Civil War letters, and exactly as you said. Paper was so scarce, they would write across and then turn it and then write diagonally, and made it very difficult to follow all the time. And then they used different language, and so I was wondering, thank you very much.
So the book translates them so that the letters are easy to read.
Yes, sir.
Are the letters stored someplace in the archive?
When I was done with them, I went back to Lisa Gandelot and I said, "Lisa, I'm done." And she said, "Well, what do you think we should do with them?" I said, "Let's store them with the Grosse Pointe Historical Society." That's where they belong.
Now, the book was published in 2018. When did you transcribe it? How far long before that?
I'm
It
sorry.
was published in 2018. What years were you transcribing?
I worked 25 years on it.
Oh, really? So Lisa gave us back when you were on the board then?
That's right.
Gave them to you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that long ago, okay.
Yes. Do you have a question? Oh. Yes, sir.
I might have missed this, but how did you get his promotion to lieutenant?
Beg your pardon?
How did you get a promotion to lieutenant?
Oh, he was appointed. They were building the regiment. That's a good question. He said, "I'd like to be an officer in a cavalry unit." And he talked to a man called Copeland, Colonel Copeland. He was recruiting a regiment, building one. And when it got full strength, then it was commissioned and off they went. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed being with you.
And you got books with that, okay.